This episode of the Illini Inquirer podcast is sponsored by BetterHelp. Do you ever find that just as you're trying to fall asleep, your brain suddenly won't stop talking? Do your thoughts start racing right before bed or other inopportune times? It turns out one great way to make those racing thoughts go away is to talk them through. And therapy gives you a place to do that so you can get out of your negative thought cycles and find some mental and emotional peace. Listen, I've had times in my life, whether it's personal relationships, work, got that thing eating at me, thinking about what's coming up next, or the anxiety of all of that comes with it, or even parenting. I deal with that kind of stuff all the time. And therapy empowers you to be the best version of yourself, something that most of us are trying to achieve. It really helps to talk it out and talk it through. And if you're thinking of starting therapy, give BetterHelp a try. It's entirely online, designed to be convenient, flexible, and suited to your schedule. Just fill out a brief questionnaire to get matched with a licensed therapist. And you can switch therapists at any time for no additional charge. If you're not vibing with therapists, you can go find another, no additional charge. Get a break from your thoughts and visit BetterHelp. Visit BetterHelp.com/Illini today to get 10% off your first month. That's BetterHelp, HELP.com/Illini. All right, let's get some insight into the Kansas Jayhawks. And man, Illinois has this knack for scheduling teams 10 years ago and getting them right on the uptick, right at one of the peaks of when they're playing well. And it's certainly true with Kansas. Michael Swain, who covers Kansas for 24/7 Sports, fog.net, joins us now. And I loved Lance Leipold, did a lot of research on him when Illinois was going through the same hiring cycle as Kansas. And I know Leipold was one of the guys Illinois was considering. They hired Brett Bielema. It's worked out for both of them, but what has made Lance Leipold successful at one of the toughest jobs I think in the country, Power 5 wise.
Yeah, I think so much of it is maybe who Leipold is as a person, and I think he'd even maybe credit Brett Bielema for this, where he got hired at Buffalo, didn't have any FBS experience as a head coach. Right, he came from the Division III level where he had loads of success, and Bielema really helped him over kind of his first months with the program to learn how to do it. And so I think he's a coach that's very regimented. We get to go to practice during fall camp. It has been the same first 30 minutes every single practice that we've seen since Leipold took over. That's what he's about. He's about day-to-day. It's process. It's continuing to hammer away at the same things. And I think that's something that other coaches that Kansas have had, that's just not been what they've done. It's been willy-nilly, kind of all over the place. You change one week, you change another. And for KU, it's about doing the same thing every day. And they've done a really good job of, I think, developing the talent that was already on the roster. And, Les Miles brought in a lot of high school recruits. KU was in a pretty terrible spot scholarship-wise when Miles took over. So really recruit high schools hard. They have a lot of young talent. And now all of a sudden that's kind of started to develop, and you're seeing a lot of those players now be the guys that are making plays on Fridays, or I guess the first 2 weeks of the season, Saturday Fridays, first 2 weeks of the season. But it's one of those deals where I think Leipold was a perfect coach for Kansas at the perfect time, and it's really worked out well.
It is amazing, the parallels. I mean, both these schools are basketball schools. Kansas much more successful, obviously at the national level. But Les Miles, Lovie Smith kind of got some recruits, but maybe didn't develop them all that well. Then you get two developmental guys who've kind of done this well. So what is the identity of Lance Leipold's program at Kansas?
Yeah, they want to be disciplined and they want to be physical. I think the physicality is something that the coaching staff has really worked hard to implement over the last year, because I think everyone knows about KU's really fast start last year, right? 5-0, college game day. The offense is flying. But over the second half of the season, when KU went up against physical teams like Baylor, Texas, Oklahoma, Kansas State, they really struggled to match that physicality. And I think all of this is kind of done in increments, where I don't think Lance Leipold came in and from the first day said, this is where we need to be. I think they've taken the slow road and the developmental approach to that. And I think that next step now is being physical. And I think that's what Leipold wants to be. And you see KU adding a lot of transfers from Big Ten programs, right? I think at the end of the day, that's what he wants this program to be. An offense that can score with the best of them, but maybe can control the clock a little bit better. A defense that is a bend but don't break four-man front that has good athletes playing in the front seven, but also can hang with some of the offenses that you do see in the Big 12. That'll change as the Big 12 evolves. But I think overall, Leipold wants this program to be a physical one, a developmental program where they take freshmen in, they redshirt, and then they really grow over 4 years to where they're redshirt seniors playing as kind of 23-year-olds and being an old team. So I think you're slowly seeing that shift happen over time, but it's taken a lot of work, and you got to give the credit to the coaching staff for getting it done that way.
Yeah, the one thing Kansas certainly has is quarterbacks. The two guys they have played are really talented. I mean,
Yeah.
Jalen Daniels, we know, Big Ten preseason player, offensive player of the year at Kansas in a league that still has Texas, still has Oklahoma, still has Oklahoma State, like great programs. Their guy is the Big 12 offensive preseason player of the year. And then Jason Bean's just come in and been super productive whenever he's done it. So, update us, Michael, on what you expect, who to play after Jalen Daniels missed, and what does each of them bring to the field, and why are they successful?
Yeah, so it's hindsight, right, is always 2020, and Lance Leipold has provided some more hindsight on Friday night's game against Missouri State, where Jalen Daniels warmed up. If you were just watching the warm-ups, he looked fine, had some zip on the ball, was still moving around perfectly fine, but it sounds like KU did not want to risk him against Missouri State, where if something happens, he takes a big hit at some point in time, and all of a sudden you're missing him for, I think, what many would argue is one of the bigger games of the season for Kansas. So when Jalen's out there, I think he elevates the offense with his confidence. And I think as a leader, it's really impressive what he's been able to do, where for a long time, right, I think the Kansas program, when things start to go wrong, it's, oh no, here we go again. And you saw that last year with Jalen Daniels at quarterback, where KU goes down 14-0 against West Virginia, 14-0 against Houston. And they came back and won both of those games because the offense was resilient. And so Daniels brings this leadership quality. The dual threat ability for him is more in between the tackles. He's not afraid to take on hits. He's a willing runner, where I think you look at Jason Bean and what he brings athletically is a little bit different, where he's more side to side. He'll get upfield, but if it comes to it, I think at the end of the day, he's going to want to step out of bounds rather than, dip his shoulder into a defensive back. And then in terms of the passing game, I think Daniels is a much more polished passer. He's a lot better at layering throws. And I think when you look at Bean, he's really good at firing in tight windows, really good at throwing it over the top of defenses. But I think you've seen some of his interceptions come on kind of those intermediate routes outside the hashes. And so I think that's where Daniels is just elite. You've seen, if you go watch his highlights from last year, the first 5 weeks of the season, you're seeing him kind of layer throws in between a corner and a safety. And those are the type of things that, Jason Bean just hasn't been able to do. But I mean, being someone that has improved so much since he took his first snap at KU in 2021. So I think regardless of who Illinois fans see on Friday, they're going to see an athletic quarterback, but it's just different profiles and different strengths and weaknesses that I think Andy Koldenreck will try and play to depending on who plays. And for me right now, I think I'd go and say I'd expect Jalen Daniels to play, but look, back injuries are tough. You just don't know. So I think I'd say Daniels will start, but I can't guarantee that.
Yeah. So Kansas, when I was watching Leipold and his Buffalo teams, and he basically brought the entire Buffalo staff with him, right? Like that offense, I was okay. That's interesting. I think that can work here. What do they do offensively, Michael? And obviously, besides quarterback, what do they have personnel wise?
Yeah, so much of it is based on motion and creating distortion with the defense. Because look, KU is not at the point where outside of quarterback, they can line up and just be better than the opposition. I think they're getting to that point. But I think you look at, for example, like wide receiver, they don't have a lot of guys that are going to go play on Sundays, but they have guys when put in the right positions, they can go out there and make plays. And that's, I think, at the end of the day, what this offense is about putting those players in positions to make plays. And obviously, I think every offensive coach will say that, but I think the way KU does it is through motion and making sure that the defense is off balance. And so much of that comes in establishing the run, right? You look at what those Buffalo teams did. They had two running backs that could both individually be 1,000-yard rushers if they had a whole offense built around them. Well, KU has that in Devin Neal, and then it kind of depends. If Daniel Highshaw is healthy, he's that guy. They brought in Dylan McDuffie from Buffalo, who coincidentally was a 1,000-yard rusher when Leipold left. So that's where it starts, establishing the run, keeping the defense off balance. And I think the offensive line is kind of that next step, right? I talked about the evolution of physicality. Well, that's where that next step is going to come from, because we're now 3 years removed from an offensive line that allowed about a little under 50 sacks in 9 games, right? Terrible. One of the worst offensive lines I've ever seen. And that unit is so much better now, where you've got guys like Kobe Baines who could start for Kansas year in and year out, and he's kind of the sixth guy. And so the offensive line has evolved over time, but I think that's kind of the next step. So I think you put this all together and it's an offense that's very much about keeping the defense off balance so that the players that KU does have, they can put them in a position, right, to go and make plays when maybe you line them up one-on-one versus an Illinois corner, or you line them one-on-one against a linebacker. I don't know if maybe they'd be able to do it as successfully.
I want to take a minute and tell you about Home Field. They are a premium collegiate apparel brand based in Indianapolis. They emphasize their commitment to creating incredibly comfortable, officially licensed apparel with vintage college designs. They feature a growing collection of over 150 plus colleges to choose from, including, of course, the University of Illinois. Home Field designs are super unique, guys, because they delve into the archives and history of each school, including Illinois, and they use unique logos and iconic moments to create thoughtfully designed apparel. So if you go to homefieldapparel.com, you can see the 80s Illini football helmet that so many like, Flying Illini logo, the Illinois basketball logo from the 2004-2005 Illini team. The script Illini is there. And you guys, these are the most comfortable shirts. And that's what I love about Home Field Apparel. You get the comfort, but you also get authenticity and nostalgia. So I'm telling you guys, give their site a look. It's not the typical Illinois gear you usually see. You can find them at homefieldapparel.com, where you can see their collection of colleges available. And guess what? Our listeners at Illini Inquirer get 15% off their first order with discount code Illini23. Again, 15% off your first order at homefieldapparel.com with discount code Illini23. So, as you go to Illinois football games, get ready for the Illinois basketball season, Home Field Apparel is the perfect apparel to get you ready for the upcoming season. So check them out at homefieldapparel.com. All right, so their problem was an offense last year. The problem was on the defensive side of the ball. One of the worst defenses in the country, especially stopping the run. Now they've had a year to add through the transfer portal, all of that. What is kind of the outlook of the defense, and how much can you actually learn, or how much did you actually learn against Missouri State, an FCS opponent in week 1?
Yeah, I think that's kind of the challenge, right? Is balancing what you learn. And I think, for me, what I think the biggest part that KU wanted to take a step forward in is the defensive line. Again, this is another part of that transition where 2021, that defensive line was trying to learn how to play a 4-man front. They brought in players to play a 3-man front, 2-gap scheme. So 2021 was just about learn the scheme. 2022 was, okay, you've got more experienced options. A lot of those COVID super seniors, can they just kind of do a job? And now over this offseason, KU's gone out and really tried to add impact players to that defensive line who fit the scheme better, who have the athletic capability that the coaching staff wants from that position. And so you look at the defense as a whole, right? They return their linebackers, they return their corners and safeties. And I think that front four is really where that next step has to come from. Now, I think athletically, that's the biggest difference I noticed, where those defensive linemen are getting upfield. And yes, it's against Missouri State, right? FCS opponent, but I think that's one of those where when you see it still, in terms of the athleticism showing, the way guys get off the ball, the way that they're able to split double teams, right? Things like that are what really stood out against Missouri State. And I think this defense now, if they can continue to do this, and this is why I think the Illinois game is such a big test, right? Because you're going against a really good offensive line. So you're seeing this evolution of this defense where they're hoping that this defensive line, being better athletically, can then make life a lot easier, where last year those linebackers had to go tackle in space in the run game. That's really hard to do, especially when the linebackers you have are more physical guys, maybe not necessarily the most athletic players, right? They've tried to change a little bit of that in the linebacker room, but still a transition period. So I think for me, so much of this season is just defensive line, and they're young. They're redshirt sophomores. They're guys that haven't played a lot of football, but I think over the course of the season for Kansas fans, right, they'll see that progression. But here in week 2, this is going to be a really big test to see really where those guys are at, because if KU goes out there and plays really well defensively, especially along the defensive line against this Illinois team, it's going to bode really well for the rest of the season. And so I think that's why, for me, the trenches are such a fascinating matchup here.
Yeah, one of the areas Illinois really want to take a step forward in is the passing game, and that certainly looked better. Their first week, Luke Altmaier looked fantastic outside of one big mistake. Their wide receiver room's experience, got some talent to it. But Kansas, like that's the strength of their defense, seems to be their secondary, with a guy named Kobe Bryant, spelled a little differently, Jacoby Bryant. But what do they bring in the back end there?
Yeah, so I think Kobe's kind of the headliner, like you mentioned. He's a ball hawk. He's someone that I think over the course of last season, he's a guy that's kind of going to be gamble, right? He's going to flip a coin. He's going to take a risk. And I think for that defensive back unit, it's all about taking that next step, right? Understanding when you can and can't gamble. And so when you look at what those guys do, it's going to be some zone, right? Last year, they played a lot of quarters. They tried to keep everything in front of them, and that helped at times, but it's also tougher when you're rushing a defense is giving up 7-8 yards on the first snap, and then all of a sudden it's second and short, and then you're put in really tough positions. So they've got really good players there at corner. I think Mello Dotson's someone that has continued to improve at that other cornerback spot. Safety, OJ Burrows is going to play more to the field. He's a really intelligent player. Physically, I'm fascinated to see how he matches up with Illinois because he's much more of what maybe you'd see in the Big 12, right? The old Big 12, if you will. Guys that can play in space, cover, not the best tackler. And then you look at the boundary side, Marvin Grant, who Illinois fans might remember from Purdue a couple years ago. He's now playing boundary safety. And then there's Kenny Logan. So they really return a lot of experience in that secondary. And the hope is that for all these guys, another year in the scheme, another year all playing together, that they'll all have a better understanding of, hey, this is when I can take a risk. This is when I can't. And maybe that'll have them be in a better position.
There's a lot of optimism coming into the season about both teams. Illinois got into a dogfight with Toledo, so maybe there's a little bit more skepticism now. But if Illinois wins this game, that's a huge road win and a Power 5 opponent in front of what should be a raucous crowd. That seems pretty excited. And setting up a huge game against a top 10 ranked Penn State. What does this game mean for Kansas?
It's huge. I think you look at this schedule for KU, and it is one of the tougher ones in the Big 12. They still play Texas. They still play Oklahoma. They've got to play Kansas State, and they got to play Texas Tech. If you're looking at the preseason standings, I believe those are the top 4 teams outside of maybe TCU being in there. So they've got a tough Big 12 schedule. And the goal for Kansas this year is make another bowl game, be a consistent bowl team. That's the next step for this program. And you look at this Illinois game, and it's a coin flip game, right? I think if this game was played some random stadium somewhere else in the United States, it'd be probably a pick 'em, probably close to that, I think. Maybe 1 point either side. And so this is a toss-up game, and Kansas needs to win toss-up games this year to get to bowl eligibility. So I think it's a big litmus test for the trenches for Kansas. How's the offensive line going to do against what I think is going to be maybe the best front 5, right, that they're going to face all season? And for KU, how does that defensive line do against one of the better and more experienced offensive lines they'll probably face this season as well? So I think we're really going to learn so much about Kansas, where this program is at and its progression. And it's such a big game just to get to that 6-win total, because you look later in Big 12 play, right, those wins aren't guaranteed.
So Illinois has long called this sleeping giant because of where it is. It's in the Big 10, recruiting territory. What can Kansas be? What do they aspire to be under Lance Leipold?
Well, I think with the evolving nature of the new Big 12, the hope is that given the right year, they can compete for a Big 12 title. I think you look across the new Big 12, who is the Texas or Oklahoma that is going to go and dominate year in and year out? I'd argue SMU's move to the ACC is going to make TCU slightly less attractive in terms of being the only Power 5 school in Dallas, right? So maybe it's not TCU. I think UCF is going to have as good a shot as anybody, right, with the Florida connection in the NIL program they have there. But you're still looking year in and year out, who are the guys that are going to dominate every year? There really isn't a clear option. And so I think over the course of time, I think the goal for Kansas is going to be, maybe once every 2, 3, 4 years, can they make a Big 12 title game? And therefore you make New Year's Six bowls, right? You're able to take that next step as a program where maybe you're one of the better third tier conference, right? Because that's what we're headed towards, is Big 10, SEC being the top 2, and then the Big 12 most likely being the third. So I think for KU, it's about, hey, can you compete for Big 12 titles? And from there, we'll see how the college football playoff evolves over time, if the guaranteed spots still remain. And if that happens, all of a sudden you're talking about being in the playoff too, which is a huge deal. So I think there is plenty of upside for Kansas, but it's still going to take a lot of work, a lot of recruiting, and a lot of development for that to happen.
What's the biggest key for Kansas to win this game?
They just got to hold their own in the trenches.
Yeah.
They can't get pushed around like you saw sometimes last season. I think that's really the biggest key, because if KU can hold its own, you're looking at that offense, I feel like they'll be able to put up points, because I think they'll find creative ways to match some of the things Toledo did, right, with motion, distorting the line of scrimmage. I think that's sort of the things they'll try and do offensively. But for me, it's defensively. Just do your best to make Luke Altmaier beat you. And if he does, you just got to hold your hands up. But it can't be a balanced offense for Illinois where they're running and then they get 5 yards and they can play action and try and hit, Williams deep over the top, right? I think they've just got to hold their own in the trenches. And if they do that, I think they've got a good shot to win the game.
Michael, it's big news that Bill Self's returning to Champaign for this exhibition game. I love it. I've been calling for Illinois and Kansas to get a home and home here, get Bill Self back, but I think this is the great chance to do it. I think he'll be welcomed with open arms now. That's been 20 years since he left Champaign. But what do you think about Kansas in that game? And we got to get Illinois to Fog Allen, man. I think it'd be a phenomenal game.
I'm with you. Look, first and foremost, I love what it's for. Right. I think this is something that a lot of more college programs should do, right? These fun games for relief for other organizations. I think it's great. I think the matchup's going to be a lot of fun. Mm-hmm. I think, right, the Shannon McCullough Texas Tech matchup is a lot of fun. I think someone like Hunter Dickinson, kind of really what'll be somewhat close to his first game for KU will be in a Big Ten arena where he's played before, I believe.
Fan base that loves Hunter. Hunter's so good. He's such a great villain in the Big Ten. And now that he's coming back for an encore at Illinois, it's phenomenal.
I love it. And he's been fun to cover so far too. I think he's a great quote and I think he's a really intelligent guy. So I'm excited. I'm bummed I won't be able to make it a little bit challenging schedule-wise with the football program, but I think it's going to be a really fun game. And I agree. I think this is something that should be a consistent home and home because, look, KU's got a big alumni base in the Chicago area as well. And I think having a game maybe closer up north would give an opportunity for maybe some more folks to see KU in person. And I think it'd be cool for Illinois, too, to come play in Allen Fieldhouse. So I'm pumped for it. It should be really fun.
Yeah, if you're going to bring the United Center game back, Illinois used to play up there annually. That'd be a pretty good one right there. Well, Michael Swain, appreciate the insight, man. I'll see you Friday night for Kansas, Illinois. Huge matchup for both teams.
Awesome. Sounds great, Jeremy. Thanks for having me on.
I'm very excited to announce a new partnership with Underdog Fantasy. We decided to partner with Underdog because it's the easiest place to play fantasy sports. It's also the fastest growing fantasy app in the industry. Underdog Fantasy has a lot to offer, including their Pick'em game. In Pick'em, you pick whether your favorite players will have a higher or lower stat total in this week's game for a chance to win big. It's so easy to play. Just pick 2 to 5 stats of your favorite players and choose whether they'll go higher or lower. You can more than 20 times your amount of money by going 5 for 5. They also have a Best Ball Mania. If you think you know football, you got to check this one out. This year's Best Ball Mania has $50 million in total prizes up for grabs, with the winner taking home $3 million. So sign up today with promo code Illini and get your first deposit doubled up to $100. Visit UnderdogFantasy.com or find them in the App Store. And don't forget to register with my promo code Illini to get your first deposit doubled up to $100. You must be 18 plus and present in a state where Underdog Fantasy operates. Terms apply. Concerned with your play? Call 1-800-522-4700 or visit ncpgambling.org.